just like to point out a few aspects of the legal conversation when we talk about governance that are actually showstoppers. That when you throw out a few of the things I'm about to say, then all of our notions about governance and shared decision making and moving forward together and setting some principles and deciding on a watershed basis actually come to a screeching halt. And in BC, we haven't really engaged in a robust way, in my opinion, on addressing these specific legal issues that will be a significant impediment to the way in which we move to a collaborative and a shared governance model at a watershed basis. And I'll just put my perspective out that I do think looking at the way in which we do, or best practices around water governance, we definitely need to move to a watershed-based models, a variety of different models in British Columbia. So those legal sort of showstoppers, I guess, I would point to our vested water entitlements, and I don't call them water rights, I call them water entitlements under our existing Water Act that date back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and as we all know that we have a first-in-time, first-in-right system here in BC, and so the senior water rights, irrespective of whether or not we understood how much water was in the stream at that point in time, and irrespective of the actual use to which they're put, take priority over all other uses. And we don't have a recognition at this point of ecological flows or ecosystem flows. So that's the first showstopper, that the person who is watering their third cut of hay in a drought year that has a water entitlement from 1915 likely takes in advance of anyone else, including the salmon coming up the stream and the grapes that are an important export crop, or the potatoes that are being grown for local consumption. The second showstopper is that that we have Aboriginal rights entitled to water in British Columbia. It has not yet been formally recognized by the court in terms of an actual allocation, but it's very clear in law under Section 35 of the Constitution at 1982 that those rights are protected, and we have no idea what those mean. So they underlay all of our existing entitlements to use water, and we haven't begun to enter into that conversation on a watershed by watershed or a region by region basis as to what those mean. And if we think that they are somewhere in the future, as you know, in the Okanagan, they're not, because there have been various conversations here. And for those of us on Vancouver Island, the Hull versus British Columbia case was decided just late last year. And although it was an appeal of an environmental assessment permit, so it wasn't an actual challenge to something based on Aboriginal rights and title, the judge was very clear that the Halal have a proprietary interest to water in the Chemainus Aquifer and in the Chemainus River, given their long-standing historical use and the cultural importance of that water to them. So from a legal perspective, it's closer than we think, and certainly from a community conversation perspective, it's closer than we think. The third contextual thing I'll say, and then I'll make my 3 points about how I think we can move beyond some of these legal showstoppers. The third contextual point is that even when we govern for sustainability, we are going to run into water allocation and management issues. And the example that I look to is south of us near Portland, Oregon, where there has been several court cases launched by senior water rights holders based on rainwater capture on green buildings. So in Portland and in other places, you have LEED certified platinum or green buildings that are using 60% less water, and they're capturing their rainwater and reusing that rainwater. And you have downstream senior water rights holders who are suing those approvals and those green building owners saying, that's our water. In fact, by capturing that water, when it hits, whatever it hits, whether it's a building or the earth, that is actually our water, and you have to let it flow into the river so that we can then use it for agriculture or whatever else. So even when you try and do the right thing, when you're basing your water governance and management system on outdated, unscientific water allocations, you're going to run into problems down the road. So the 3 points I'd like to make are, first I'll just say them and then I'll do 1 minute on each of them, that we need to connect land and water planning. So we need to marry smart growth with water governance and water planning in order to truly understand or get a handle on what we're doing in our watersheds from a hydrological perspective, given the high concentration in British Columbia on 2% of the landscape, with 80% of the population and 80% of our farm gate receipts being all cohabiting in the same locations. So connect land and water use. The second one is, instead of talking about compensating water entitlements, because there is no new money for compensation in terms of retracting water entitlements, let's talk about regulating the way in which we can use water entitlements, which is certainly within the purview of the provincial government as we do land use, such that we're not expropriating water entitlements, we're regulating how they are used that then better reflects the ecological conditions under which we use our water entitlements. And then thirdly, and I think that this gets back to virtually everything that my colleagues have been saying today, is that we need to scale our governance to negotiated solutions based on ecological and other scientific principles in watersheds, and then move forward on that basis. And that has, and I'll leave it at that, I'll get to that in a second, but instead of spending millions of dollars on litigation, as they did in the Klamath Basin over the last 20 years, what did they eventually end up with? A negotiated solution that is not based on any historic water entitlement. Everyone simply sat down and said, we have no more water, and what are we going to do about it from an indigenous or fish or a ranching perspective. So